15 minutes after 8, you're watching Morning Live. Thanks for being with us. Now, the Basic Education Department says that more than 500 learners and 1,100 staff members have been infected by the coronavirus in schools over the last 3 weeks. And since reopening for grades 7 and 12 earlier this month, 775 schools have had to close due to infections. Now, the South African Democratic Teachers Union, or SADTU, says that although these figures are shocking, it should not be preventing learners from returning to school. And joining us now is Mr. Mugwena Maluleke, the General Secretary of SADTU. Thanks so much for your time this morning. Welcome to Morning Live.
Morning and morning to our viewers at home, and thank you for having us. We really appreciate the time.
Mr. Maluleke, if I could just establish right off the bat, before we get into any of the other details, when we spoke to the unions previously, it was clear that all the unions were in unison with regard to their perspective, their point of view on the issues pertaining to teachers and learners and the return to school. As things stand right now, has there been a split in those views between SADTU and other unions?
Well, there's not been any split between ourselves and the other unions. We are still in unison in terms of things that we have been agreeing upon, in particular those particular non-negotiables. So clearly it is that the mere fact that other schools reopened before the others should not be, be translated into divisions among ourselves as the unions. We are still having our own concerns about what is happening and what is going to happen on the 6th of July. So we are still sharing same sentiments around the issues of dignity, which is water and ablutions and so forth. So we are still united as the 5 unions.
So we'll be speaking to the other unions later on, but as SADTU, are you saying that although the figures that I just quoted in my opening are shocking, that should not be a reason for learners not to return to school? Please explain to us.
Well, I don't know who said that. We are saying that the figures are shocking, and therefore that says that we need to go back to the drawing board and begin to make an assessment on whether the schools are really coping in terms of understanding the origin of the transmission. Over and above that, because it's a requirement that we're able to establish the checking system, and so that we're then able to trace. As things stand now, the figures are really increasing, and therefore it then says to us we need to review the strategy in terms of the reopening of the schools, in terms of the number of learners that are supposed to be joining those that started on the 8th. On the 6th of July. It can't be that we are blind to the fact that schools are really struggling. Schools are being closed. There are schools that have not even reopened as we speak, and therefore it just cannot be business as usual, because we've got to be understanding what steps and interventions we have got to take if we are to increase the number of learners that have to come. It has to be discussed today with the Department of Education to then say, are we going to face one grade or are we not going to face, and wait a little bit, especially in the hotspots, in order to ensure that the schools are really able to understand and able to deal with the situation. So indeed, we can't be saying everything's normal. It's not normal. It's only that schools have reopened, and therefore we needed to build resilience, as schools are the center of the community. And in building that particular resilience is that we must not really send a panic button. We need to really use our heads, plan and think, and be able to say, are we able to send more learners or not?
So as the plan stands right now, if we look at primary schools, grade 6, grade R, 1, 2, 3, they all expected to return. So given the statistics that you do have at your disposal at this point, Mr. Maluleke, what is SADTU's view? Should we be seeing all those grades returning to schools, or would you be more circumspect at this time with the information you currently have at your disposal?
With the information at our disposal is that we have got to rethink the plan and begin to ask questions in terms of what grades are vulnerable in terms of them not being able to cover particular areas, whether it's grade 1 or is grade 4, which is transiting and so forth, and talk about how best we can be able to do that. But in our view, you cannot be able to send all the grades at the same time. The schools are not coping. And obviously is that the grade 12 learners in some of the schools in Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, Mpumalanga and Limpopo are still at home as we speak, and therefore those are some of the learners we're supposed to be prioritizing. So we need to be very circumspect when it comes to sending all the 50% or 52% of our learners. The system is not able to cope.
And I tried to get this from the Education Director General last week, Mr. Mugwena. Are you able to give us any clarity on the schools that did not open and where those schools may be located, Mr. Maluleke? Do you have that information?
Yeah, I do have that information, and I can indicate that about 88 schools in Mpumalanga were not able to reopen up until the 18th or even the 20th. So one school will open on a day. So 88 schools could not open in Mpumalanga. 84 schools could not reopen in the Eastern Cape due to same problems, pollution and water. And in the Eastern Cape, it goes worse because you still have about 34 schools that did not have the personal protective equipments for the learners as well as the teachers. And therefore, we need to also be able to link the rise in as a result of this non-preparedness of the department in providing that. Then we had about 48 schools in KZN that could not reopen. Same problem of water and pollution. And also in Limpopo, we also had a problem with the schools that do not open. In Gauteng, the schools have reopened. However, on the first week, they couldn't reopen because of vandalism and infrastructure that was dilapidated. So yes, we do have those particular numbers. Even in terms of the regions where the schools are located. We can be able to provide that information.
So, looking at those realities, what are the plans, firstly, for those schools, those learners who are unable to return to school to actually catch up?
Remember that we said, as the 5 unions as well as the school governing bodies in our joint statement, that those schools that were not ready cannot risk the lives of the workers as well as the learners. We had then requested the department to make arrangements and alternative measures to be taken in order to ensure that those learners are not left behind because it is denying them the right to education. The South African Human Rights Commission came in and weighed in and ensuring that that happens. However, as we know, the deliberate bureaucratic efficiencies in our department is so shocking that to this day, they have not been able to do that. So we will hear the plans today when we meet as the 5 unions in order to discuss how best we are able to deal with the 6th of July. But the basis of discussion is to understand what is going to happen to these particular learners because we cannot afford to have them not being able to be covered in terms of education. So alternative blending education as well as online as well as your distance learning are some of the things that we have said that they must be looked at and so forth. So instead of spending 66,000 to buy 1 tank of water, we should have used the 50,000 to ensure that we are able to provide these learners and their teachers with gadgets that will be able to work at home and be able to have a zero-rated data that should work. So these are some of the plans. But unfortunately, corrupt does not understand human needs. What it understands is accumulation and dispossessing of those who do not have. So it's disaster capitalism. It thrives from crisis after crisis. So, this inflation of prices are only informed by greed and nothing else, not the love for our country and not the love for our children. Because for now, we can't be suffering in this country, not be having data, not having online education for our children who are not at school, not because they did not want to go, but because of the conditions that have been subjected to them.
So the reality is, and you've had just about a month now to assess the situation, and not forgetting that there have been interruptions at certain schools where positive cases had been detected, Mr. Maluleke. But in this period, one would imagine that learners would have come back at different levels of, preparedness to resume. Some would have had some enrichment exercises while they were at home, others not. How difficult has that been for educators to contend with?
Well, it has been a nightmare for the educators. Three types of learners in the class: those who have been able to progress during the lockdown, and those who attempted to be accessing radio lessons and the TV lessons, and those who did not have at all in terms of that. So basically, our teachers are beginning to show signs of fatigue. They're beginning to show signs of depression, and the lack of psychosocial services is what we are appealing to the country to ensure that we are able to be assisted. Very difficult to do that. And we have therefore advised our teachers and our school management not to really put pressure on already the teachers who are traumatized, who are doing everything to improvise to ensure that they are able to group those particular learners and ensure that they are able to take them through what they can do and not what has been lost, because what has been lost is lost. We cannot recover. What we can do is to ensure that those particular skills that are very, very important for progression are being taught. The concepts that are important in order to building a rounded human beings are the ones that we have to concentrate on and be able to continuously review the curriculum as well as the proficiency levels of each and every learning area in order to ensure that at the end of the day, after 2 months or so, all learners should be able to say, this is what we know and this is what we are able to do as we progress next year. So in other words, you have got to do what you have to do as a teacher under the circumstances. And we really are standing in solidarity with our teachers. And the cases that we are seeing, indeed, we want to express our condolences to the colleagues that we have lost, but also standing in solidarity and support for those who have been affected by this particular pandemic.
And then you look at some of the pedagogical issues, Mr. Maluleke. You look at issues around assessment and what constitutes a fair assessment. So what sort of thinking are you engaging in at this time around assessment? Because as you pointed out, you have these children in various categories as they return to school. So what would constitute a fair assessment in this regard, also considering that you have children who still haven't come back to school yet?
Yeah, I think we need to be able to send a message of hope to our children. This is a new normal. This has created so much uncertainties, and therefore we have sent a team of our people as the unions to sit with the department to look at how they can alter the curriculum in order to ensure that those particular proficiency levels and the necessary skills and knowledge are looked at. So we are, as the unions, united, we are talking about that we need to use a school-based assessment, just like the international practices in some of the countries that have been affected, to then say there will be those particular subjects or learning areas that would have got to be tested in depth and those that would have got to be able to continue them in 2021. So in other words, the school-based assessment teams have to be set up, have to be strengthened, and therefore each and every teacher or the school must be allowed to exercise their professional judgment in terms of how they can assess. So, the pedagogically speaking, it is that you are not going to be able to have the common exams in under these particular circumstances, given the fact that the levels of access to education and quality education has not been at the same rate at which you would have loved it. And therefore, you've got to understand that the circumstances and the contextual factors affecting the schools have got to be taken into account when you assess. So we need to give the teachers and the principals and the district officers that particular professional judgment, autonomy for them to be able to assess and be able to say to us, this is what we've assessed. And therefore, we still have to have these learners in 2021, and we'll then be able to take forward those of the concepts and skills that have not been able to be covered.
We literally have just a few seconds left, Mr. Maluleke, so I know you may think it unfair, but I'm just going to fire a few quick shots at you, and
Yes.
please, if you can, just give me very brief answers to them. So, firstly, the Eastern Cape chapter of SADTU, they are calling for schools to be shut down. Does the national office share that sentiment?
We have responded to the Eastern Cape to say they needed to engage with the department. We sympathize with the situation, and we have had some meetings with the MECs and the SG in that particular province. And therefore, as the National Executive Committee, we're meeting this week to assess, and therefore we share the sentiments that very well. So we really agree with the province that there are problems.
Also, you said that it would seem as though there is no clear way to manage these cases of COVID-19 and outbreaks in schools. Please, what would you like to see happen in that regard in terms of clarity?
The first thing is that we need to establish the Department of Health and the Department of Education have got to have a very good working relationship. Plans must be put in place in ensuring that we don't suffer. We don't suffer in terms of the communication that we have today in our schools, because the teachers and the principal don't know who to call and who not to call. So the standard operating procedure is not working. So what we would want is that particular lines of communication between the Department of Education and the Department of Labor, so that we don't frustrate and create more trauma to our teachers who find themselves in a situation where they have to sit in a school that has been contaminated and nobody's helping them. So there are still some problems that we need to sort out around that issue.
Well, Mr. Maluleke, I believe your breakfast is served. Someone just turned around with it there, so let's leave you to it. Thank you so much for your time this morning. General Secretary of SADTU, Mr. Mugwena Maluleke, talking to us about the infection rate among learners and school staff over the last 3 weeks. And that brings us up to time for news headlines with